So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, today we're going to be continuing our tafsir, which is a tafsir that we started out some while back ago. Let's actually look at this one, right? Just to kind of overview what we're really doing and what we had done before. So let's see. إنما يريد الشيطان أن يوقع بينكم العداوة والبغضاء. That is shaitan. The main attempt that shaitan wants to do is to instill animosity and hatred in using different items. Now, I want you to look at this one because when you see and you look at the paradigms in the ayat, they're usually trying to take you to recognize how to tell the different paths apart because they can be murky. What does that mean? When you are taking so many different approaches, there's an approach that someone is giving you in terms of a decision in regards to something, another approach, and another idea, and the things can all of a sudden become so murky that you can't really tell the difference between what's right and what's wrong anymore. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us one method to know whether something is right and wrong is by looking at the source of it, al-wahi. If it's not wahi, that means it's from shaitan, okay? Or that means it's from al-hawa. It's either going to be dhan, or it's going to be wahi, or it's going to be الهوى. يتبعون إلا الظن وما تهوى الأنفس ولقد جاءهم من ربهم الهدى. So we're looking at, you can know whether this is diabolical or whether this is wahi and divine by looking first at the resource, at the basis of it, at the center of it. That's one way of knowing. Sometimes it's hard to know. If you don't actually have a resource, and what resources am I able to use? So yes, you do have Quran and Sunnah, but what if this isn't necessarily something that is related right directly, where Quran and Sunnah could distinguish for me that this is, let's call it divine, or whether this is diabolical? Something new. Let's give an example, like drugs. Okay. We don't have any resource that necessarily tells me that drugs are bad because, well, drugs, they weren't there during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, even though that's not necessarily accurate because they did have different substances that they used to use, or at least were available and known to them. But the second way of knowing whether something is good or wrong is basically looking at what it leads to. So if we're not able to look at the center, then we're going to look at the other end, which is, where is this taking us? If it's taking us to things like injustice, things to hatred, animosity, then in that situation, that end of it and where it's leading us to is one way to knowing whether this is something evil or whether this is something good. The other method is to look at within the line. So we said the beginning, we said the end of it and where it's leading. And sometimes it's hard for us to know, well, where is this really taking us? Where's this really going? So what's the consequence of all of this? Sometimes it becomes, I guess, murky, and then we might not realize that we're creating our own narrative and our own rhetoric in order to beautify that this is taking us to the right end. Like, for example, when we're speaking about alcohol, you had some of even the Sahaba, when the ayah was saying in regards to alcohol that they contain good within them, وَإِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِنْ نَفْعِهِمَا, and the harm is more than the good that they might bring, or the good that the interest, the benefit that they might bring. Some Sahaba, they said, well, the reason why I'm drinking it is really for the good in it. So I'm doing my precautions to avoid what is bad, and now I'm only consuming it for the good. Even though the ayah was clear, you would see some Sahaba, they somehow still went into, I guess, looking at it from a different angle and didn't necessarily see that that was too straightforward to tell them that no, it contains more harm. And therefore, you should know that this is indicating that this is not good for you. You had some group of Sahaba understood it that way. Another group of Sahaba, they understood it as there is a way to go around with this. So it can happen that something, even when we would look into the end of it, sometimes it can still be something rather murky because as human beings, we do have the capacity to self-manipulate ourselves. So that's why the third method is also key to knowing whether something is ethical or not ethical. And that is by looking at, remember our rule, DNAIM, by looking at the middle piece of it. In other words, we're looking at maqasid al-sharia. Is it something that is leading our deen towards the right direction? Is it leading our health towards the right direction? Is it leading our mental health towards the right direction? Is it leading our family and justice and stability? Is it leading our wealth towards the right direction? So those are the areas you're looking at. One, the center, the resource. Two, you're also looking at the end of something. And three, you're seeing how compatible it is with maqasid al-sharia. Those are the three resources, and those are the three paradigms to look into to help us know whether something is compatible or whether something is going in parallel with Islamic legislature or with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded in terms of principles or not. We're going to look at these three resources. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, now I want you to see that shaitan, the main attempt is basically to get you into injustice, into hatred, and that's what khamr, alcohol, and gambling does to you. But that's not the only thing. But there's another thing, يَصُدَّكُمْ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. His attempt or his other attempt is to also push you away, alter you from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wait a minute, what does the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have to do with this? Because when you basically have your center towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, you're looking through the lens of Quran and Sunnah. You're looking through the lens that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent, which is al-Wahi. By looking through that lens, you're going to be capable of seeing truth as truth and falsehood as falsehood. What is dhikr? Dhikr is in different ways. There's the visual dhikr, your ability to see, distinguish things, and really understand them based on the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed things. But there's no way that you could have the visual dhikr unless you have your ilm in place. So visual dhikr, to obtain the visual dhikr, you need to do your homework in studying the religion itself, taking the time to study fiqh, to study hadith, to study tafsir, to study the different resources, because that's the way to make sure that, well, hey, you're not going to get a wahi. You're not going to get Jibreel telling you the rulings of things. That was already set and finalized during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And that's why he said the ayah was revealed that رَضِيتُ لَكُمُ الْإِسْلَامَ دِينًا. That's it. There's no way. There's nothing after it. الْيَوْمَ أَكْمَلْتُ لَكُمْ دِينَكُمْ. Today, the religion was perfected. There's no more to it. In other words, don't expect to get a wahi. But What you can get is vision and enlightenment through al-wahi, which is يَصُدَّكُمْ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. You want to make sure that you're not, let's say, turned away from the visual dhikr by having your own your own speculation take over what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent in terms of dhikr. So we've got visual dhikr, two, oral dhikr, which basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent in terms of wahi. And three, there's the audio dhikr, hearing the Quran, etc. That's the audio dhikr. And there's the oral dhikr. It's what you're saying. But what you're saying, whether we're speaking about doing tasbih, you're doing all of that, that's the oral dhikr. But the oral dhikr really processes through what was processed in your brain, in your vision, in your mind, what you had been hearing, what you had been processing in terms of ideas, that becomes your oral dhikr. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us, well, there's another key thing to help you maintain that visual dhikr and that oral dhikr and that recharge, which is a salah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ in regards to al-khamr, in regards to alcohol, and in regards to gambling, another addiction. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the Quran would speak often about different types of addictions, and in fact, the stronger the addiction, the stronger the force, or let's say the words that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would use in order to prevent us, to prohibit us, and to preserve us from getting attached or even finding ourselves connected with these items. And the stronger the addiction, the stronger the ayat, are the words in the ayat or the ahadith are telling us to keep away from such behaviors or from such items. فهل أنتم منتهون? Are you then done? Are you then completed? So we went in details with this one. وأطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول واحذروا فإن توليتم فاعلموا أنما على رسولنا البلاغ المبين. And certainly at the end, of course, you're going to have your interpretation, but it's important to keep in mind that أطيعوا الله, obey Allah and obey the Messenger. Even if you may not understand perhaps the reasoning, the argument, or the explanation behind the different rulings, at the end, we know that some rulings may not be completely clear to you as to why this is halal, why that is haram, and why this ruling is in such way. At the end, when we're speaking about obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, be certain that that's what's going to lead you to 1, justice, 2, Jannah, 3, light and guidance within your life. Even if you may not understand all the different interpretation or all the different reasoning that might probably be behind a certain ruling. واحذروا. And this is extremely important as well, even when we're raising our children or when we're also trying to, let's call it, do our own tazkiyah. Not necessarily do we understand the reasoning behind everything, but we just know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would only order us for what is good. Sometimes when we speak about even ruling the masses, especially the masses, when we're ruling the masses, it doesn't always have to be based on, yes, I'm giving you the idea, I'm giving you the interpretation. Sometimes we have to rule based on that this is what we had finalized in terms of governance, and therefore whoever would go against the rule, that in that situation there's going to be a fine. For example, you can consider that, well, there's a red light, a camera put on that red light, and whoever would cross and trespass that red light, even though it could probably be that at that moment, the person that is driving had made sure that it was completely safe to cross the red light. Then they would cross the red light because they said, well, I used my brain, I used my intellect, and I saw that there was nothing left, nothing on the right. It was completely safe for me to cross the red light. Is the government going to let that go, or is the government going to say, sorry, you were spotted trespassing, crossing a red light camera, therefore you will be fined? That's exactly what's going to happen. But what if the person had said, well, I was completely fine. I'm okay. I'm okay with me harming my life in crossing a red light camera. I say, well, no, even though there was no one. So therefore I was, hey, and guess what? I even crossed the red light. No one was harmed. So I am right. We're going to say at the end is that there's a certain law, because when we're looking at organizing traffic lights, the probability of this making a mistake, or depending on your intellect and making a mistake in situations where there could be different than your situation. So we have to consider a baseline. We would have to consider a basis. And that basis is that we need to regulate what goes and what comes, and how we manage to make sure that people are organized and not necessarily depend on your intellect. Because if I'm going to depend on your intellect and your evaluation of things, then we're going to be living in relativism. If we're going to be living in relativism, then that's going to be taking us that every single person's viewpoint is going to be true, because I'm going to be depending on your viewpoint, and therefore we're going to be then regarding that there is no truth. The whole idea of regarding there is no truth is an idea of absurdity, because we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically sent and created this world in a certain paradigm, in a certain pattern, in a certain law, whether we're speaking about space or whether we're speaking about things on earth. Everything has a certain number to it. Everything has a certain law to it. So having that being said, with the same order that there is أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول واحذروا, that obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and obey the messenger, because واحذروا, and you better be cautious. Why be cautious? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that the second that you would disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger, you would be increasing your chances of finding yourself in ends that are not suitable for your interest. In other words, when he says wahdharu, it's basically saying, hey, you gotta be careful. If you don't follow the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger, you're gonna basically increase the chances of putting yourself at harm and putting yourself at stake for different odds without you recognizing. At the same time, wahdharu could also mean that there are different temptations to get you off the right path, off the path of obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger. And that's why this ayah says, فَإِن تَوَلَّيْتُمْ. If you were to turn away, well, this is a form of a threat. فَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا عَلَى رَسُولِنَا الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينُ. Just know that the word is أَنَّمَا. أَنَّمَا is different than إِنَّمَا. Okay, because annama is giving you a clarity. It's giving you, so this is right there, giving you, after he had told you, hey, if you want to turn away, if you don't want to obey, we just let you know. Annama, now giving you the clarity, and the clarity is that the messenger was only coming with al-balagh al-mubin. What is al-balagh? The root for al-balagh is balagha. What is balagha? Balagha actually means to reach. To reach something is to get to a final destination. But here, this isn't to get to a final destination. It's actually a combination of al-balagh, and al-balagh means he basically had one duty, which is to inform you and give you the complete knowledge and give you the complete information in regards to one, the reasoning for your life. In other words, the test and how to live it, and certainly the purpose that preceded your existence. And therefore, that was all to be clarified through the different revelations. What revelations? There are two kinds of revelations. There is the oral revelation, which contained the information in al-Wahy, in al-Quran, and the Sunnah. There's two, the demonstrative revelation, the Prophet ﷺ himself was demonstrating to us what we're supposed to be practicing, what we're supposed to be doing in terms of applying what was revealed in al-Wahy, which is the informative Wahy, the Wahy that was revealed orally, which is the Quran and certain words in the Sunnah. So we've got two types of Wahy. We've got the oral piece of it, and we've got the demonstrative piece of it. Now, having that being said, that is making it mubin. What is mubin? Mubin means clear. Mubin means it's not murky. There's no ambiguity in it. It's completely obvious. It's completely clear. So therefore, in annama ala rasulina al-balagh al-mubin, that the main duty that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent the Prophet with was really to give you a clear and a complete vision, which is al-balagh, and the information to the demonstration in how to apply it. ليس على الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات جناح فيما طعموا إذا ما اتقوا وآمنوا وعملوا الصالحات ثم اتقوا وآمنوا ثم اتقوا وأحسنوا والله يحب المحسنين. We went in details with this ayah, said that there is no sin upon the believers and those that had done piety and done well, basically, that there's no sin. Here's the word junah, and we said the word junah is coming from the root janaha, which actually means to trespass, to inflict. And when we're speaking about infliction, we talked about that the word janah also means the wings. So whenever one's wings, and we're speaking about birds here, whenever any wing basically is harmed in any way, one, there's a loss of balance. Two, they're not going to be able to basically continue because they just lost their balance. So when we're looking at al-janah, we're looking at it from a different angle. We went in the word sin, and we said sin looks at it from dhanab or dhanb, and that's taking us at least something that will trace back. And we said from different angles of how we would see sin as one probably coming back to us, probably making us lose our balance, probably coming from the angle where it's making us lose our ability to tell our GPS, to tell our guidance, and to tell our direction where we're supposed to be going. So when we speak about sin itself, it's important to scrutinize that word and see the implications of sin and how far it can go in leading us to different areas without us realizing and impairing our ability to move on in our life. whether we're speaking about mentally or whether we're speaking about in our choices in our life. In other words, the different decisions, or whether we're speaking about physically, or whether we're speaking about socially, or whether we're speaking about financially. We may at one point think that this is some form of success, but without us realizing it was nothing but a self-manipulation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then of course, we talked about the main reason for the revelation of this ayah. The main reason was because the Sahaba, when this ayah was revealed, فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ, that was really letting them know that alcohol was actually forbidden. So some Sahaba were worried about those that had died while still consuming alcohol because at the time it was not abrogated, it was not considered haram, but they were drinking, they were consuming alcohol. Does that mean they were going to be doomed to hellfire? So that's why this ayah was revealed that no, those that had consumed when they had consumed alcohol at the time, if they were in good faith, if they were in good action, but at the time this was not abrogated, then there would be no accountability. They wouldn't be held accountable for the drinking that they were doing at the time. And certainly there are certain conditions. The second stage, إذا ما اتقوا وآمنوا وعملوا الصالحات, if they had basically lived in taqwa. What is it, taqwa? Taqwa is a shield. What type of a shield? It's to shield you by giving you the protection and the armor from falling into sin, because sin has gravity. Without you realizing, the gravity of sin can pull you towards not one sin, but through different sins. They start rolling like a snowball, and it becomes a slippery slope where you cannot hold on to it unless you had the taqwa slash the shields to protect you from gliding or at least falling and slipping down. Because that's what taqwa does. Taqwa is to give you a shield. How does it give us a shield? The stronger you are in giving yourself the ability, the armor, the strength to stop yourself, whether in stopping yourself from doing what is haram or forcing yourself to doing what is obligatory, the stronger you would become in whatever temptation there could be around you. So this is key. It's not enough to not do, but you also have to do certain things. That's to give you the strength. That's it, taqwa. And ثُمَّ اتَّقَوْا وَآمَنُوا. But that level of taqwa is one level. It's possible that a person can be in a stage of iman and still do what is haram. A person, it can happen that they're believers. It can happen that they have the faith, but they're having their moments of shortcomings. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ثُمَّ اتَّقَوْا وَآمَنُوا ثُمَّ اتَّقَوْا وَأَحْسَنُوا. Then they embraced taqwa, that's a different level, and embraced another level, which is al-ihsan, which is it's to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as if you could see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wallahu yuhibbul muhsinin. For the Lord Almighty loves al-muhsinin. Who's al-muhsin? Al-muhsin, we're basically deriving it from the hadith. We talked about this before. This is just a revision of what we had done in the past. That hadith, that is Hadith Jibril, and it's telling us that it has basically three key things, three key levels in terms of iman, in terms of faith. There's the level of Islam, which is considered the borderline of how close, or at least in coming within the borders of being Muslim. And that's the borderline. The borderline is really that the person believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet ﷺ, does his prayers, his fasting, his zakah, and his hajj. That's the borderline. But the second level is no, the person is maintaining more of those boundaries to get within the parameter of Iman. Now they're getting closer. They're going farther inside. And usually that relates to those moments when how you're living your private life. When no one's aware, when no one's seeing what you're doing. Are you really living the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Are you really considering that you're not looking at haram, you're not speaking of haram, you're not trespassing those boundaries, and you are living the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What are you really doing? So when you're looking at that border, that's أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه. But that second, the more you live in consistency with that iman, with that taqwa, the more consistent you are with it, the more firm, that's going to lead you to the path of al-ihsan. The path of al-ihsan, أن تعبد الله كأنك ترى. It's to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as if you could see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, maintaining that position that you are really right now feeling and embracing and recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you at all times. And therefore, the presence of the Lord Almighty is within your awareness at all times. That's a hard thing to live because we can be doing something and we're indulged in what we're doing. If we're constantly holding the vision that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching us all the time, it becomes something that we kind of lose focus on what we're doing, right? So here's the thing. This isn't to mean that you're going to be focused all the time where, of course, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there all the time. It would really almost be impossible to live it all the time because it's a scary feeling to feel that I'm going to be right now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching me and I have to be conscious of it all the time. How do I manage to actually focus on what I'm doing? So this isn't to necessarily mean that you're losing your focus and your thought and your centricity into what you're doing. Okay. But this is that you're maintaining the guidance so you would recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you. So while you're, I don't know, giving a dars in tafsir, for example, you're able to get into the words, you're able to scrutinize, you're able to zoom in on the words, you're able to get into all those details, but you recognize at the back end that once you get off this track, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you. So let's say you're asked a question about something that you don't know, that you would recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is وَلَا تَقْفُ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ. And don't give answers to what you don't have knowledge about. If you're asked about something that you don't know, say Allahu A'lam. Say I don't know. Say I have to research. That's part of taqwa. Now you recognize that whenever you would get out of the perimeter, you would recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there. So therefore you would live between al-khawf wal-raja. Al-khawf wal-raja. How is al-khawf wal-raja? Ibn al-Qayyim, he actually mentioned that in order for a bird to glide, they need two things. Al-khawf wal-raja. They need two wings. These two wings are basically al-khawf wal-raja. One wing would basically glide and basically hit in order to go towards perhaps a certain destination, a certain goal. And the second one is to balance that bird to make sure that they basically don't lose balance. And therefore, they would live in hope and fear. You would hope and glide towards your destination, but you would also fear that if you don't continue to balance yourself, that you might actually drop at longitude, and without you realizing, it was really because your hope and fear were not working together. Now, keep that one in mind. So when you're looking at al-ihsan, it's to live in both hope and fear. And we talked about a certain story, and we went in that story in these stories about the Sahaba and how one Sahabi understood it, that he wasn't going to be included in this because he had participated in the battles of Badr, Uhud, Al-Khandaq, and so forth, and therefore he wouldn't be held accountable for whatever he is consuming. And we went in details on how the Sahaba responded to this, and we went in details as well in terms of that Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he went to that Sahabi and basically seeked reconciliating with that Sahabi. And we went in detail with that story, so I'm not going to go to it, but just remembering that story. And we said that when Umar ibn al-Khattab for Qudama, of course, it was Qudama, and that was the story that we went into right there, Qudama ibn Mad'un. And certainly we said when Umar ibn al-Khattab had embraced him and he had a dream to embrace Qudama ibn Mad'un, it wasn't that Umar ibn al-Khattab had regret applying the rule, because the rule is supposed to be applied on all the Muslims with no exception. If there's an exception for perhaps someone because they're from Badr, or because there was something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made it as an exception, well, we don't have the power to apply such exceptions if we don't actually have the evidence for it. So when Umar ibn Khattab had embraced Qudama ibn Mad'un, it wasn't that he was telling him sorry, and it wasn't him apologizing for applying the rule, but it was for him to remove any animosity that probably was there in Qudama ibn Mad'un's heart for Umar ibn al-Khattab, basically, of course, ordering that he would be flogged for drinking. So he just wanted to make sure that they would stay as brothers and that there's no hard feelings, basically, because in the end, they're both people of Jannah, inshallah. Okay, now we left off at this ayah. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا يبلونكم الله بشيء من الصيد تناله أيديكم ورماحكم ليعلم الله من يخافه بالغيب فمن اعتدى بعد ذلك فله عذاب أليم. We went in some details with this ayah, along with this ayah, and يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, O you who believe. Now, of course, when this ayah would say, O you who believe, it's basically letting us know that this is in order for the believers, that this is a border, that this is a certain boundary that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had set, and it has nothing to do with you perhaps finding some interpretation that could probably be, I would say, maybe attractive to you, but no. When you consider that there is يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, that means if you want to be included within the mu'mineen, well, here's a border for you. Here's an armor for you. Here's something that you would want to embrace to get you stronger in faith. لا يبلونكم الله بشيء من الصيد تناله أيديكم. What is لا يبلونكم? لا يبلونكم comes from the root بَلِيَّ. So, or when you say that you're going to be tested, what does it mean that you're going to be tested? So there's so many different things that, of course, you will come across. There are certain rulings, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will test your commitment. How does that happen? So let's say you're a person that loves fame. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will test your commitment to إخلاص. الإخلاص استواء المدح والذم. What is الإخلاص? الإخلاص is basically having sincerity. How do I know if I have sincerity? Whenever praise and derogatory comments don't change and alter your stance, then you've got your ikhlas in place. So what does that mean? Let's say you're wearing hijab, and you are wearing hijab as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regulated, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered hijab to be worn in, of course, or as. But let's say people are making fun of your hijab. It's making you look fat. It's making you look old. It's taking away your beauty. Now, the second that you're going to alter your hijab to suit people's praise and to suit people's comments on you, then your ikhlas has a problem with it. Because you're altering your choice of embracing the principle to suit the comments and to suit people's choices. That's a sign, an indicative thing that you are seeking praise. So therefore, if the person alters their choices of embracing the principles based on people's derogatory comments or praise, let's do it the other way. You're getting praised for the way you're wearing hijab, or praised for whatever you're doing. Should I stop because I'm getting praised? No. If you're doing the right thing, then continue doing the right thing. But work on making this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and don't stop. Because the second that you're stopping, because even though you're doing the right thing, the second that you're stopping, then you had confirmed that you're doing it for people. But when you're doing the right thing, continue doing the right thing. Even when people praise you, just make sure that as much as you conceal and you make that good thing that you're doing, make it as a private thing as much as possible. What if you can't make it private? You're not going to be wearing hijab in private, right? Well, the rest of the things, what you can practice privately, your dhikr, your hifz, etc., make it as private as possible in order to not increase the praise on you. You know, some salihin used to do different things that would probably be strange. I'll mention that, and then you can probably comment on it your own way. They used to do qiyam al-layl. And when they would do qiyam al-layl, they would cry, and the crying would basically let their eyelids and their eyes, of course, swell. And because of the swelling, of course, they were afraid that they might get praised for the swelling in their eyes, that they were doing qiyam al-layl. So what they used to do, they used to put kuhl. The kuhl is not an eyeliner per se. It was kuhl. It was uh, from al-ithmid. I don't know what it is in English, but it's a type of it's a type of an organic thing that basically is used on the eyes, to one, for treatment, two, for beautification and cosmetics basically, and they would basically cover their eyes with it. So yes, they would appear like they're men with eyeliners. But the reason why they were doing that is to cover what really would show signs that they were doing Qiyam al-Layl and weeping throughout the night. Or perhaps maybe wear sunglasses, but they didn't have sunglasses at the time. All right, this is just an idea of what they were trying to do to conceal what good things they were trying to do, or what they had been doing in order to avoid any praise. But when you're looking at al-ikhlas, istiwa al-madh wal-dham, that's the key word right there. لا يبلونكم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in order to see your consistency and to test your consistency, you will come across different hardships that is probably testing your commitment. So what test were they going through? Well, this test was rather different. This test, they were getting the attempts, the temptation, basically to hunt. You want to keep in mind that the Arab didn't have the resources of vegetation like other countries. You could see in other countries, they depend on perhaps crops and vegetation because it's in abundance. But the Arab living in a desert area, their only source of food was really the hunting that they could depend on. That was their source of food. So when the ayah was revealed in situations where the person is in a state of ihram, going for umrah, going for hajj, they were supposed to be abiding by a complete restriction of hunting. During ihram, during the state when they are going for umrah or hajj and they're dressed in their ihram, they are not permitted to hunt. Now that was, I guess, for them. I'm definitely not tempted into hunting whatsoever. In fact, I don't even see it at all as something that is tempting to me, even if I would see a deer, I guess, I don't know, running in front of me, I would just probably run away because I would think it's probably attacking me and not necessarily see it as something fun to look at because I would be afraid that it might attack me because I guess I'm just a city girl that's not familiar with all of this. But for somebody that is living in the wilderness, that's a temptation to, hey, barbecue and food. Now, that's why this ayah, it's, remember, العبرة بعموم اللفظ لا بخصوص السبب, where the general theme in the ayat is not necessarily in the particular item that we're talking about, but in the general idea, in the general meaning of this, to let us know that there's a general meaning that if, for example, you're tempted by, let's say, men, you're going to get an abundance and it's going to come your way. Does it come your way because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is putting them your way? Or is it because that's a temptation to you that you will see it more often? In other words, you're recognizing it more often. It's in two ways. If somebody is tempted by perhaps, let's say, appearance, their ability to recognize appearance is probably stronger than someone else. If you're tempted with food, whenever you would see food, your temptation grows stronger than probably somebody that's not big on food. So, in other words, what could be a fitna to you is not necessarily the fitna to someone else, and that's al-ibtila. How is it? Is it something that I'm designed with? Is it something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designed me with? It's actually both. It's one, it's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created within you. You might have a stronger buildup, probably temptation in food, probably temptation in sexuality, probably temptation in authority. The list goes on and on. You have to know yourself in order to avoid all the different slippery slopes that might take you somewhere else. You have to know yourself. What did you fall into? What are your areas of temptation? And then, based on that, you have to, after the diagnose and after knowing your areas of slippery slope, then you would have to know your capacities. What are my capacities? What are the things that are basically strong in me to enhance, to give myself a strong armor? That taqwa piece. What do I have to enhance in myself? Having that being said, when we're speaking about slippery slopes, that's al-ibtila. Al-ibtila, that's the slippery slope that might be to you stronger than someone else. And then because it's a slippery slope, you're able to get attracted to it, perhaps stronger than someone else. If somebody's attracted to food, you'll see that they're looking and their ability to recognize food and have a taste for food is probably stronger than someone else who's probably the temptation, or at least the area of temptation to them, is probably appearance, is probably praise, is probably men, women, whatever it is. So that area of temptation is something that you have to recognize, because there goes the second thing. So we said one could be a buildup within you, that you've got a taste for such things, and it could be something within you. Number two, the stronger you feed such temptation or such capacity, the more you feed it, the stronger it gets. Whether we're speaking about an armor or whether we're speaking about a weakness, if you continue to give your weakness the power to control you, it will control you. And if you, on the other side, if you give your armor, you give your taqwa the power to enhance and enforce your capacity to get you stronger, then that's when you're basically going to see that you had enforced your ability, and therefore think of it as the wings. Think of it as the wings. If you weaken this side, that side goes stronger. How do you create that balance? Let's see. She said, could you speak a bit on those who struggle most with temptations of laziness? This seems to be a unique temptation. So when we're speaking about laziness, it depends on what type of laziness you're actually talking about, because there's a laziness to do perhaps ibadah, and there's a laziness to talab al-ilm. There's a laziness to perhaps work around the house and do all of that. One main thing for laziness is food. Food. Food itself is actually key. When you would consume a lot of food, you become basically full of weight to get up to do something. That's one type. That's one key thing to why we could get lazy. Food. So therefore, working out is actually key to help you overcome that laziness that might actually overcome you. Number two, it's also ilhim. Laziness could not necessarily be as a physical laziness, but it could be an inner encouragement and himma itself, that you have the desire to do something. How can we get our himma in place? There are different ways to get our himma in place. Number one is to remember the bounty and to remember the reward. Remember Jannah. If I am to do such thing, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the reward for it is magnificent. That's to encourage you. Now we're looking at one angle. The second thing, ilhimma, could also be encouraged and could also be motivated and moved if sometimes by looking at a farther destination and a farther reward, many times we can lose our himma because we feel that a reward is too far off. So imagine like a child. A child, well, the younger they are, you don't want to delay the reward too long. So you'll say, if the younger they are, if you finish your plate, you eat your broccoli, you eat your vegetables, I'm going to give you, I don't know, a piece of chocolate, whatever. And of course, they'll recognize their memory that it's within an hour. Okay. But of course, the older they get, now we're going to prolong the timing of when they will get the reward. If you manage to stay consistent, perhaps within a week, by the end of the week, I will give you this. This is the reward that you'll get. And of course, when they go older, then, hey, if you manage to be consistent for a whole 4-year period of your bachelor's degree, then we're going to give you this reward. Then, of course, it's going to be longer and longer. The older you get, the more you're capable of recognizing that the reward doesn't have to be fast in coming to you or at you, but the reward, the more delayed it is, the stronger and the bigger the reward. So what to speak about the laziness part, in the beginning of trying to be consistent with your Islam, it might feel that I need to reward myself, for being consistent for this amount of time, with probably to maybe do this. Well, here's the thing. The temptation can sometimes overcome you. So to help you overcome the laziness, that's number 3, you might need to not only give yourself a reward, but you might actually need to get support, especially women. Women are different than men because we're social beings. So to have a support group for women is extremely important to keep them on track with their iman. So joining the masjid for probably a competition on memorizing, maybe, I don't know, Surah al-Mai'da, okay? Or competing in memorizing this hadith or these ayat or etc. That's one form of enhancing our commitment and enhancing our ability to overcome laziness. That social support is extremely important because we would feel the competition, because it basically gives us a reward. Maybe we can agree that here's the reward that we're going to be getting. If we were to memorize this, maybe we would memorize Surah al-Mai'da. We need maybe a group of 10 sisters. Each one is going to perhaps try to maybe donate, I don't know, $70, and the $70, if we're talking about, or $100, let's say, just to invest in that commitment. And prize number one goes for the money that we had collected, maybe goes for the first place, the second place, etc. And that way we could feel. And you cannot withdraw the money, but that's to basically invest in helping us stay committed. That whoever memorizes, let's say, this amount, then they will be getting prize one is probably maybe, I don't know, $400, and I guess second place gets 200, whatever it is. All right. And the rest, of course, maybe we'll make a party and buy food or whatever it is. So that's to probably create different methods of creativity in order to empower us against laziness. So just wanted to answer that point. لا يبلونكم. And I'd love to hear different ideas that sisters out there they basically used in overcoming laziness and overcoming, I guess, that not having the motivation to probably learn or probably be committed or be consistent. I'd love to hear different ideas. Okay, let's continue. بشيء من الصيد تناله أيديكم ورماحكم. What is a صيد? A صيد is basically hunting. Okay, so they were being tested, and of course, it becomes a temptation that their hands and their rimah, they're basically their arrows, their bow and arrows, would basically catch. ليعلم الله ما يخافه بالغيب. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to basically see who really fears him بالغيب. What is al-ghaib? Al-ghaib is basically in the unknown. But this isn't unknown per se. This is more bil ghaib, when no one is watching. Are you really going to be committed when no one's watching? Are you really going to be committed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's principles, even though it's really tempting to you to not apply it? فَمَنِ اعْتَدَى بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ فَلَهُ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. Then whoever اعتدى, what is الاعتدى? اعتدى actually means to transgress. So what happened? That's a transgression. In other words, there's a border, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rulings are basically borders. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rulings are basically areas for you to find commitment in. If you were to transgress that, then that's basically going to be a form of going out of the borders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in that situation, the person is going to be putting themselves in target of shaitan. فَلَهُ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. And plus they would have painful torments. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَقْتُلُوا الصَّيْدَ وَأَنْتُمْ حُرُمٌ. Here's another يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَقْتُلُوا. Do not kill a صيد. What is a صيد? A صيد is basically what you had hunted. While you're in a state of ihram, you're not permitted to slaughter, kill what you had hunted while in a state of ihram. And whoever kills what they had hunted, and it was done purposely, then فَجَزَاءٌ مِثْلُ مَا قَتَلَ مِنَ النَّعَمِ. Then in compensation and in replacement for what they had killed, they would basically donate from what is in-na'am. What is in-na'am? In-na'am is basically going to be from the different items that we would consume we would speak about cattle, camels, goats, and sheep. So in other words, the price of an equivalent price that يحكم به ذوي عدل منكم, experts, and they would say, well, what you had killed, let's say the person killed a zebra and hunted a zebra, then the experts, they would say, well, this is equivalent to the life of perhaps a sheep or a goat. And then they would donate that price. And that's the expiation for it. Okay? The expiation for probably hunting a zebra or maybe hunting a deer, hunting whatever they weren't supposed to be hunting. The equivalent expiation for it is basically to look into the different items that we would consume. So are we not allowed to eat chicken while we're in a state of ihram? Are we not allowed to eat, I don't know, biryani, goat, mutton biryani? No, we are allowed to eat those because those are not hunted. Okay? Those are not hunted. You don't hunt sheep. Those are domesticated. Okay? Sheep, you don't hunt them. Those are domesticated things. Camels, camels, there are domesticated camels and there are camels that are basically in the wilderness. Okay, but we're talking about domesticated. The things that are domesticated, those are not hunted. That's permissible for the muhrim to slaughter. Even if a person is in a state of ihram. What is the state of ihram? The state of ihram is basically when the person that's going for umrah or hajj, they would go into certain areas called al-mawaqit. Okay, now these are al-miqat. They would stand in certain areas, have the intention that they are starting their umrah or hajj officially. For men, they would dress in those two white garments called al-izar and al-rida. And for women, they would dress basically their own clothes. For men, they would basically put fragrance if they want to put fragrance on that day that they are officially making their ihram. But after that and after leaving al-miqat, they could in that area and putting on the intention to start their hajj or their umrah officially, then they cannot be intimate. They cannot cut their nails, they cannot cut their hair, they cannot hunt, they cannot put any perfume or fragrance for the time of that ihram until they are finished with their hajj or their umrah. Okay, that's al-ihram. For women, for women, they would dress in their own clothes, of course, hijab and their own clothes, what they're wearing, but they would not be intimate. They would not put any fragrances, of course. They would not cut their hair. They would not cut their nails either. Those are the general things. And of course, they would not hunt. Okay, so until they finish their umrah. What if they were to get their period? That's absolutely fine. Just a fast thing. This is a common question. They could still do their hajj and their umrah even if they were to get their periods. There are differences of opinions in regards to, okay, well, does she do the tawaf or does she not do the tawaf? I'll just make the story short. Okay. There is a considerable opinion when she's doing al-ihram that she would basically say, basically do the ihram at that moment. And basically, during that moment, during il-miqat, while she's standing in il-miqat, she would basically say, labbaika hajj or labbaika umrah, and that the ihram would end when or if she's not capable of continuing, if basically she's not capable, but that is beyond her capacity. Okay, that's a number different scholars had mentioned that one. Okay. Now, the second piece of it, does she do sa'i? She does do sa'i. Okay. Sa'i, she would do it. She would do everything except for الطواف. Except for الطواف. Unless this is the pillar tawaf. What is the tawaf? The tawaf is going around the Kaaba. It's circulating around the Kaaba. If she's not capable of delaying her tawaf, if she's not capable of delaying her tawaf until she finishes her period, then in that situation, she would do a tawaf that is the pillar tawaf. And that's a considerable opinion that Ibn Taymiyyah had said, that she would do the pillar tawaf. Let's say she can't stay, she's got a flight, she can't keep the whole group waiting for her until she finishes, then we would say, do your pillar tawaf even if you had your period. Just to keep that one in mind, okay? Because a lot of girls, they would say, okay, that's it, I'm canceling my Hajj or Umrah. No, I cancel it, continue. Just learn what you're supposed to be doing. Okay. ومن قتله منكم متعمدا فجزاء مثل ما قتل من النعم يحكم به ذوى عدل منكم هديا بالغ الكعبة أو كفارة طعام مساكين أو عدل ذلك صياما ليذوق وبال أمره. So when do they actually do and pay this expiation? Oh, I could see my connection starting to go down. Am I right?
No, it's the same.
It's the same? Okay, good. Let's continue. So هديا بالغ الكعبة أو كفارة طعام مساكين. So what do? Do they give the expiation just in that? Or is it that they would feed poor people on behalf as an expiation for what they had done, basically? Okay, so that's an expiation. We'll go in detail. عَفَى اللَّهُ عَمَّا سَلَفَ. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically forgiven them for what they had committed before, if they were to pay the expiation, whether it's giving the price as a donation of an equivalent thing from Inam, or whether it's to feed certain poor people, or whether it's to fast certain number of days to give an expiation for what they had basically committed in hunting. وَمَنْ عَادَ فَيَنْتَقِمُ اللَّهُ مِنْهُ. And whoever goes back to such a behavior, then the Lord Almighty will فَيَنْتَقِم. What is الانتقام? Al-intiqam is basically when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would take revenge. Why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take revenge from that person? Well, because they had transgressed a limit that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded as sanctuary. Wallahu azizun dhu intiqam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aziz. What is al-aziz? Al-aziz is basically a self-efficient. In other words, if you don't want to be committed to that ruling, then the Lord Almighty is really not in need of your commitment. You're the one that's in need of this commitment. It's for your sake. ذو انتقام. What is ذو انتقام? The word ذو, just this ذو and that and the, actually means, it's like a conjunction. It's basically ذو انتقام. It's he is accompanied with this description right there. ذو انتقام, in other words, he is capable of seeking revenge. Whoever trespasses the Lord Almighty's boundaries. And نسأل الله العفو والعافية. And أحل لكم الصيد البحر وطعامه متاعا لكم وللسيارة. Now here's the thing. We're going to get in details. We're just, making this in general. Is all and every type of hunting not allowed? No. Because the hunting that you would do sea hunting is permitted. That's why it said أُحِلَّ لَكُمْ صَيْدُ الْبَحْرِ as an exception to the generalized statement لا تقتلوا الصيد, because remember the al can be an inclusive al and can be a specifying al. So, because this can be misunderstood to mean every type of hunting, an inclusive al, this ayah comes in to basically give an exception. And that's why it said, أُحِلَّ لَكُمْ صَيْدُ الْبَحْرِ وَطَعَامُهُ مَتَاعًا لَكُمْ. What was permitted is basically a type of hunting that is the hunting that you would do at sea. And even consuming it is permissible whether you're a traveler or whether you're basically living in that area. That's permissible for you to hunt sea animals. وَحُرِّمَ عَلَيْكُمْ صَيْدُ الْبَرِّ مَا دُمْتُمْ حُرُمًا. Yet, in terms of wild animals, then that's what is considered as impermissible to hunt for as long as you're in a state of ihram. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي إِلَيْهِ تُحْشَرُونَ. And have that commitment. The word taqwa can mean to put as an armor, but you can't put on armor unless you're committed. And you cannot be committed unless you're consistent. Let's do it again. To have the taqwa is to have the complete shield. You cannot have a complete shield unless you're committed to the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To be committed, you must be consistent. These three things, they come together, and that's what forms taqwa. And that's what defines salah: consistency, commitment, and certainly that creates that armor and that piety within you. How? When you keep in mind and in your vision that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala إِلَيْهِ تُحْشَرُونَ, that you're going to be resurrected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's how you would maintain taqwa. Let's look at maintaining taqwa in the other ayah just before that. What brings taqwa is آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. What brings taqwa is faith and عَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. عَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ comes with consistency in applying faith. And آمنوا عملوا الصالحات اتقوا وآمنوا. Now we could see that repetition is basically an indicative of consistency, an indicative of commitment, an indicative that that's what's going to lead you to having والله يحب المحسنين. Having that love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and having that commitment. Inshallah, tomorrow, we're hopefully, inshallah, we're going to be capable of doing the same thing that we had done today. So we're going to be going into Tafsir al-Qurtubi to tell us more details in regards to the tafsir for this ayah. So stay tuned, inshallah. And if there are any questions, alhamdulillah, we managed to actually get this far today. So that was pretty good, alhamdulillah. And inshallah, we'll be capable of continuing. So if there are any questions or if there are comments, I'd be happy to listen to it. I guess everybody is just,
I have one question.
Go ahead, Noura.
So I don't know a lot about Hajj, because I've never been, but inshallah we're learning here. But is it required to make two rakat for the miqat?
That's a sunnah, dear.
Oh, it's a sunnah. Okay.
It's
I
a
was
sunnah.
just making sure, because if you had your period, I wondered if how. Okay.
Yeah, no. Yeah,
Sorry.
there are certain exceptions that you're not capable of doing, like for example, like salah. Then in that situation, hey, you can do different forms of dhikr. You could do that.
Yeah, and even if you had the niyyah and you know, your situation prevented you from doing it, wouldn't you still get the ajr too?
You would still get the ajr. And of course, in fact, the Prophet ﷺ basically tells the Sayyidah Aisha, tells her, افعلي ما يفعله الحاج غير أن لا تطوفي بالبيت. Just do what al-Hajj would do, except don't do tawaf, don't go around al-Kaaba. So does that mean that she's not allowed to do that tawaf? That's where that differences of opinions between scholars, that she would basically do the tawaf if only she's not capable of staying long enough, because that's a pillar tawaf. So only the pillar tawaf she would basically do. Why not the other tawafs? Because the Prophet ﷺ basically said, افعلي ما يفعله الحاج غير ألا تطوفي بالبيت. Do what a person in Hajj would do, except don't do tawaf around the Kaaba. So then they went in details. What if she's not capable of doing it? What if she can't stay long enough? Is the tawaf basically, is it obligatory to stay with tahara? There's that differences of opinions.
Alhamdulillah for the different opinions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other questions? I guess this is it. Inshallah, we will continue tomorrow. Inshallah, we're going to be as consistent as we can. Inshallah, as we can be. Inshallah.
Jazakallahu khairan.
وإياك.
Oh, by the way, I wanted to say something.